Welcome the Lord's chosen. The loudest secrets are never shouted. They are whispered in corridors until the walls themselves start leaking them. For years, chosen one, a lie was carefully woven around your name, not by strangers but by architects who understood how narratives outlive facts. History proves that entire empires have fallen, not because of the strength of their enemies, but because one insider finally couldn't carry the weight of the deception any longer. And here's the twist. The very same person who once poured cement over your truth is now the one chipping at the cracks. Suspense, irony, and justice all rolled into one. Think about it. Scandals, whether in politics, corporations, or personal circles, don't collapse under external attacks. They implode when someone on the inside gets tired of hiding the receipts. The human mind can stomach guilt for a season, but guilt with evidence, that's a ticking time bomb. And now that clock is striking for those who engineered your downfall. Here's the deliciously ironic part. Their confession isn't some angelic act of conscience, it's survival. It's the classic save my skin before the ship sinks move. Like a magician revealing his trick only after the crowd already caught the wires, they're exposing the very lie they once built to protect themselves from drowning in it. And while the drama unfolds, let's admit the humor in it all. The same mouth that once spoke against you now suddenly wants to play saint. The liar has to become the truth teller, and it's giving plot twist of the decade. It's like watching a thief return stolen goods but expecting applause for honesty. So brace yourself. This isn't just about truth surfacing. It's about the theater of betrayal, the collapse of a false empire, and the delicious irony of watching someone set fire to the very stage they built to trap you on. And in this story, you don't have to lift a finger. The same hands that forged the chains are now fumbling with the keys. Number 1, exposures don't begin with truth, they begin with guilt. That's the part people rarely admit out loud. Nobody wakes up one morning with a sudden burning desire to set the record straight because they've had a moral awakening. That's fairy tale thinking. What really happens is pressure builds, slowly and silently, until the very person who crafted the lie starts suffocating under it. It isn't truth knocking at the door that rattles them. It's the gnawing sound of guilt eating away at their sleep, their confidence, their ability to act normal around others. Guilt turns into paranoia. Paranoia turns into mistakes. And mistakes start looking a lot like cracks in the story. When someone finally decides to expose the lie, they aren't doing it for you and rarely for the audience either. They're doing it for themselves, because carrying a lie that big is like carrying a weight that never gets lighter. At first, lies feel manageable, like secrets you can tuck neatly away in a back pocket, but over time they grow heavy, messy, unpredictable. They demand constant maintenance. You have to remember what you said, who you said it to, how you spun it the first time, and whether your allies are keeping the same script. It becomes less about fooling others and more about keeping yourself from falling apart. That's where guilt creeps in like a leak you can't patch. It's important to understand this. Exposure is never born out of kindness, it's born out of survival. The guilty party senses that the lie they helped create is now circling back, ready to swallow them whole. Guilt whispers to them that silence won't save them forever, and so they break before the story does. In a twisted way, they think spilling truth early might soften the judgment, or at least give them a chance to rewrite their role in the play. But no matter how much they confess, the stain of their participation never disappears. So when someone finally opens their mouth and starts telling the truth, don't mistake it for courage. See it for what it is, guilt that grew too loud to ignore. The lie didn't collapse because they suddenly loved honesty. It collapsed because they couldn't carry the weight anymore. And in that collapse, the truth you were denied isn't just revealed, it's dragged out by the very person who once buried it. That's the irony. And that's the beauty of guilt. It always testifies, even against its host. Number 2, the betrayer always knows more than the victim. That's the raw truth most people don't like to sit with. When someone sets a lie in motion against you, they aren't just throwing random words into the air. They are working with both sides of the story. They hold the evidence of your innocence in one hand and the false narrative in the other. That means from the very beginning, they had more control over how the story unfolded than you ever did. While you were busy trying to live your life unaware of the trap being built, They were carefully curating the version of you they wanted the world to see. This imbalance of knowledge is what makes betrayal so cutting. It isn't just the lie itself that hurts. It's the realization that someone close enough to know the truth chose to weaponize it against you. They didn't misunderstand you. They didn't accidentally get the story wrong. They deliberately withheld the part that would have set you free, because the power of a lie only works if truth is hidden. And so they played both judge and executioner, deciding how much light was allowed to shine on your name. That's why betrayal feels so suffocating, because you're left confused while they're operating with full clarity. They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what they're leaving out. They know exactly how to keep you looking guilty even when you're not. It's not ignorance on their part. It's strategy. That's why when exposure finally comes, it's never just a revelation about what happened. It's also an indictment of how much they knew all along. And here's the sharp edge of it. When the betrayer speaks up later, when they finally come clean, they are still in possession of more than you ever were. They can narrate not only the lie they spread, but also the proof of the truth they buried. That gives them the strange, twisted power of both building and dismantling the narrative. The victim waits helplessly for freedom, while the betrayer controls the locks and keys. So the reality is, betrayal isn't about someone stumbling into a mistake. It's about someone choosing to manipulate the scales while watching you drown under the weight of their silence. They knew more. They always knew more. And that knowledge makes their betrayal not just an act of cruelty, but an act of calculated domination. Number 3, a lie built against you is a prison built for them. At first, it doesn't look that way. When someone fabricates a story about you, they think they're trapping you, boxing you into a corner where your reputation, credibility, and influence are tied down. On the surface, it appears they've succeeded. People believe their version, doors close in your face, and whispers replace conversations. But what they don't realize in the beginning is that the prison walls they built were never meant to contain just you. They have to live inside it too, and over time, that prison becomes tighter for them than it ever was for you. The moment they crafted the lie, they chained themselves to constant upkeep. Lies don't live on autopilot. They demand feeding, maintenance, reinforcement. Every time someone asks a question, every time circumstances shift, every time new eyes start paying attention, the liar has to go back and patch holes, fill in details, or spin the story again. And here's the catch. The more a lie is repeated, the heavier it becomes. What started as a single false statement grows into an entire architecture of deceit, and the builder is stuck walking through it every day, afraid of their own cracks showing. This is where the prison turns on them. You might carry the weight of false judgment, but they carry the weight of constant paranoia. They live with the fear of contradiction, of exposure, of being caught in their own web. That fear controls their movements, their speech, their alliances. They can't relax because they know too much. They can't trust because they've betrayed. They can't breathe freely because the air around them is filled with the smoke of what they set on fire. In the long run, a lie doesn't just tarnish the name it's pinned on, it erodes the one who forged it. They become prisoners of their own invention, locked inside a story they can never fully escape. And unlike truth, which stands on its own, a lie always demands more lies to survive. That endless cycle becomes their sentence. They thought they were locking you away, but in reality they sentenced themselves to a lifetime of guarding the very prison they built. And that is a burden no one escapes unscathed. Number 4, the fear of exposure is always greater than the exposure itself. That's the twisted psychology of those who build and protect lies. They spend years rehearsing, calculating, and polishing their performance, convinced that if the truth ever came out, the world would collapse on top of them. But here's the irony. It isn't the truth that drains them, it's the never-ending dance of concealment. Covering up takes more energy than admitting. Hiding requires constant vigilance, constant strategy, and constant anxiety. The exposure, when it finally happens, often arrives like a sudden storm, short, loud, and decisive, but the fear leading up to it stretches on for years, eating away at their nerves like acid. The cover-up becomes a lifestyle. They lie, then they lie about the lie, then they monitor others to make sure no one else slips. They replay conversations in their heads, paranoid about what they said and to whom. They build alliances not out of loyalty but out of necessity, dragging others into the conspiracy so they won't stand alone. Yet every new cover adds another layer of weight, and every layer makes the collapse more inevitable. Fear turns them into their own jailers, patrolling a secret that controls them more than it ever harmed you. What makes it almost laughable is that the actual exposure, when it comes, is often far less catastrophic than what they've imagined in their nightmares. People move on, the world adjusts, the sky doesn't fall. But for them, the years of rehearsed paranoia leave permanent scars. They aged faster, burned energy they could never get back, and tied their identities to keeping a lid on something that was never fully in their control. That's why the exposure is almost a relief, even for the guilty. The waiting, the hiding, the never-ending rehearsals, all of it takes a heavier toll than the confession itself. The truth lands like a blow, yes, but the fear was the real punishment, dragging them through sleepless nights and anxious days long before a single word was spoken. And in that sense, exposure doesn't just free the victim, it exposes how much the liar has already been suffering under the weight of their own fear. Number 5. Every lie has a birth certificate and a death certificate. That's the reality people forget when they're standing in the middle of false accusations or watching their reputation get dragged. Lies feel permanent when you're the one carrying the consequences, but they are not immortal. Like anything artificially created, they have a starting point, a middle stretch, and an inevitable end. Someone birthed the lie. They put words together, whispered in the right ears, and crafted a version of reality they wanted others to believe. That's the birth certificate. It marks the beginning of something that was never supposed to exist, but was forced into life anyway. From there, lies need help to grow. They can't stand on their own legs. They rely on people willing to spread them, willing to repeat what they didn't witness, willing to feed the rumor mill because it benefits them or entertains them. That's the adolescence of the lie, messy, noisy, and reckless. In that stage, the lie feels powerful because it seems to have momentum. It looks like it's winning because the truth is often silent while the lie runs loud. But what's loud isn't always lasting. Eventually, every lie reaches its expiration date. Someone destroys it. Sometimes it's the guilty party cracking under guilt. Sometimes it's an outsider who stumbles on evidence. Sometimes it's time itself, stripping away the details until the story no longer adds up. But one way or another, the death certificate gets signed. Lies are fragile because they require constant upkeep. And nothing that fragile can last forever. What's striking is that lies don't just die quietly. They often collapse dramatically. When the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't just cancel the lie, it exposes the mechanics behind it. People suddenly see not only what was false, but also who created it, who enabled it, and who stayed silent. That aftermath is often uglier than the original lie itself because reputations fall not just for dishonesty, but for complicity. So when you're caught in the fire of a false story, remember this. What was manufactured cannot outlive what is real. Lies come with paperwork. They are born at a moment in time, and they die at a moment in time. And no matter how strong they look in the middle, their end is already scheduled. The only thing eternal in the equation is truth. Number 6. The silence around your name was engineered, not organic. That sentence carries a weight most people miss because silence is easy to mistake for indifference. It wasn't that people couldn't see what was true, it was that someone with influence decided the truth would be quieter than the lie. Silence was paid for in favors, pressured through networks and sold as loyalty. It wasn't a natural quiet that fell away over time, it was a constructed vacuum designed to keep you isolated and mute. Those who engineered the quiet knew the mechanics. People follow direction, not nuance. They nudged conversations, nudged decisions, nudged the temperature of a room until the only sound left was the rumor and the nodding that accompanied it. Allies were told to look the other way. Witnesses were coached into forgetfulness. Information was rerouted, delayed, or withheld. What looks like an absence of defense is often the result of careful blockage, doors closed intentionally, not by accident. When silence is engineered, it's never absolute, it's transactional. Someone somewhere exchanged something for that quiet, a promotion, protection, access, or a promise. People who benefited from the lie or feared losing their place in a system chose convenience over courage. They accepted the easy path of agreeing with the dominant story because dissent carried personal cost. That transaction turns a community into a cage, and the cost is paid in your reputation. The engineered silence also rewires perception. Once the majority behaves as if nothing is wrong, others assume the story must be true. Social proof kicks in and the lie gains legitimacy. That's the genius of manufactured quiet. It doesn't scream, it quietly convinces. And it keeps you from shouting back because every attempt to speak is met with a wall of coordinated shrugging and plausible deniability. Breaking engineered silence requires different tools than exposing a rumor. You don't just counter facts, you reveal the architecture of the hush. You show the chain of favors, the dates when conversations were cut off, the names that show up in the margins. When the mechanism is exposed, the silence loses its force because people realize their quiet was not neutral. It was an act. Then, loyalty looks like complicity and the comfortable become accountable. The lesson is brutal but simple. When people ignore you, don't assume ignorance. Assume motive. Assume someone calculated the cost of speaking and found it too high. That recognition turns passive isolation into evidence of a system at work. And systems can be dismantled once you stop mistaking orchestration for apathy. Number 7. When the builder of the lie becomes the dismantler, power shifts instantly. That turnabout is cruel in its simplicity. The person who once wrote the script now controls the director's cut, and everything they reveal rewrites the story with authority. People listen differently when the voice that seeded the doubt starts naming the omissions. Not because they suddenly like fairness, but because that voice carries proof. The switch is terrifying for the original architects, because they lose the comfortable anonymity of the cover-up. The safety that comes from hiding behind others collapses the moment they step forward. Their confession reframes past choices and exposes the decisions they made to keep you down. This reversal also rewires credibility. For months or years, the lie's originator could bluff and fan the narrative from behind the curtain. Their claims were diluted, contested, or dismissed, and that was enough. But when they pull the curtain back, their previous authority lends weight to the new account. People who once repeated the lie now face the awkward reality that their testimony came from someone who had access to the facts all along. The dismantler doesn't merely tell a new version, they reveal that they were the curator of the false version, which forces listeners to reassess everything they accepted before. That reassessment is instantaneous and irreversible. The psychological effect is brutal. Those who benefited from the lie scramble because the safe lines they used to recite no longer fit the evidence. The dismantler's words act like permission for others to speak, and worse for the conspirators to point fingers. What was once coordinated silence starts to unravel as allies reconsider the cost of staying loyal to a story its author now condemns. The dismantler becomes a pivot point. Every ally's past choices now look voluntary and complicit, not accidental or misinformed. That revelation shifts moral balance and social power at the same time. Finally, the dismantler controls the narrative's anatomy. They can specify who knew what, when, and why. They can produce timestamps, names, or small details that force the world to confront the truth behind the fiction. That level of control is what terrifies the original builders more than any punishment. It's not the loss of face they fear so much as the exposure of the mechanics that allowed the lie to live. Once those mechanics are out in the open, the lie loses not only its story, but also the leverage it once provided. Power then doesn't just change hands. It evaporates from those who thought they bottled the truth forever. Number 8, exposure never arrives to clear you, it arrives to condemn them. That's the hard, unromantic truth about revelations. When someone finally speaks the truth of what happened, the event doesn't act like a savior wrapped in applause. It acts like a judge bringing the docket. The words that come out are not handed to you as absolution. They land back on the shoulders of the people who engineered the lie, naming choices, methods, and moments of complicity. In that moment, the story shifts from a mystery about your guilt to an inventory of their decisions. Confession and exposure are instruments of accountability, not charity. The dismantler isn't performing a mercy. They're returning evidence to its rightful context. They point to the dates, the calls, the agreements, the favors, small facts that, when collected, map the path of responsibility. Those details do more than prove an old claim wrong. They reveal how the lie was built and who profited from it. That process is a condemnation because it reframes silence and obedience as calculated acts. People realize that what looked like ignorance was often choice, and choices have consequences. For the accused, exposure can feel oddly secondary. The relief of being seen for what you are doesn't automatically erase the damage done during the lie's lifespan. Doors stayed closed, reputations were damaged, trust dissolved. Still, the exposure focuses attention where it belongs, on the architects. The public gaze turns from you to them, and that redirection carries a moral weight. It's not just that they're revealed as liars, they're revealed as authors of harm. That revelation strips away the plausible deniability they relied on. The mirror they suddenly face is merciless because it reflects not only facts but motive. It forces them to confront why they chose to lie, whom they protected, and what they traded away to keep the lie alive. That confrontation can lead to legal consequences, social exile, or the slow corrosion of relationships that mattered most. The exposure doesn't clean your slate for you so much as it cleans the record of what was done to you. By exposing the perpetrators, it undermines the entire framework that made the lie effective. Don't expect melodramatic redemption. Exposure is blunt and often ugly, and justice that follows is messy. But the core reality remains. The moment the truth is spoken, it's not a gift to the wronged. It's a verdict on the wrongdoers. The light doesn't rescue you so much as it reveals who lit the match. Number 9, the person exposing you is also exposing themselves. That's the unavoidable trap of confession. It never comes clean. Every detail they share, every fact they bring into the open, doubles as evidence of how deeply they were involved in the first place. To speak truth now is to remind everyone of how much truth they buried before. The exposure doesn't make them look noble. It makes them look guilty because you can't tell the story without placing yourself inside it. That's why people hold back for so long. They know the moment they pull at the thread, it won't just unravel the lie around you, it will unravel their own credibility. To admit what really happened is to admit how long they stayed quiet, how many times they lied to protect themselves, and how willingly they participated when the lie had momentum. They can't separate themselves from the narrative because they were the narrative. And when they finally decide to talk, the spotlight swings back onto them with an intensity they never prepared for. This is why confession feels like punishment disguised as truth-telling. By opening their mouth, they reintroduce their own fingerprints into the crime scene. Every word is a reminder that they were not a bystander, they were an architect, or at the very least a willing accomplice. People hearing the confession don't just absorb the truth about you. They start asking silent questions about the speaker. If you knew this all along, why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you speak sooner? What were you gaining by staying quiet? Those questions hang heavier than the confession itself. And no matter how much they try to frame it as remorse or courage, the undertone remains. This is damage control. Confession becomes a survival tactic, not a redemption arc. It's less about freeing you and more about lessening their own sentence in the court of perception. But in trying to save themselves, they can't avoid exposing themselves. The same tongue that built the weapon against you now testifies against its owner. And the irony is brutal. In the end, their exposure functions as a double-edged blade. It cuts through the lie they crafted around your name, but it also slices through their own mask. They can't hand you freedom without simultaneously handing themselves over to judgment. And deep down they know it. That's why every confession comes laced with fear. Number 10, lies age faster than truth. They sprint out of the gate with energy and bravado, but the moment they are left standing under the weight of time, they begin to sag. A lie, no matter how carefully dressed, has poor stamina. It wrinkles, it cracks, it develops inconsistencies, the way cheap paint peels in sunlight. At first it may look convincing, sleek even, but lies don't know how to hold up under scrutiny. They are like gossip in a small town, amusing in the moment but laughable once the facts start catching up. Meanwhile, truth sits still. It doesn't hustle, it doesn't shout, it doesn't need to do push-ups in the corner to stay relevant. Truth is patient, almost arrogant in its confidence that it will outlast the noise. While the lie wastes energy trying to patch its holes, the truth grows stronger simply by existing. Time has a way of polishing truth the way water smooths stone. And by the time the lie begins to stumble, truth looks untouched, even radiant. This is why people who cling to lies always appear tired. They must remember what they said, to whom, in what order, and with what level of detail. They rehearse, they respin, they over-explain. The maintenance costs of a lie are astronomical. Truth, by comparison, is low maintenance. No adjustments, no revisions, no cover-ups. You could leave truth unattended for years and it would still walk into the room unbothered, while the lie shows up, looking like it just got dragged out of bed. Humorously enough, lies even develop their own form of arthritis. They creak when asked to move under new circumstances. They limp when questioned too many times. They huff and puff when someone younger, sharper, or less invested starts poking holes. In the end, they collapse under their own contradictions. So while you grew stronger in silence, not because you wanted to, but because life forced you to hold your ground without explanation, the lie that once seemed threatening began to wither. It didn't just lose strength, it lost credibility, coherence, and even comedy value. Nothing is more humiliating than watching a once powerful accusation dissolve into absurdity. Lies may enter the world loud and proud, but time is the greatest cosmetic surgeon for truth and the greatest undertaker for deceit. Number 11. A lie doesn't collapse because of truth alone, but because of timing. That's the part people underestimate. Truth by itself is powerful, yes, but dropped at the wrong moment, it can sound like noise, be dismissed as irrelevant, or even make you look defensive. Timing is the weapon that turns truth from a whisper into a wrecking ball. The right words spoken too early don't liberate. They get buried, ignored, or ridiculed. The same words spoken at the right moment shift the entire room and make denial impossible. Those who engineer lies understand this, which is why they try to control the clock. They don't just spread the falsehood, they manage the tempo of conversations, release distractions at critical points, and build delays into every attempt to clear the air. They know that if they can outlast your urgency, the truth will lose its punch. Lies survive not because they're stronger than truth, but because they're better timed, injected when ears are open and reinforced when questions are rising. That's why exposure that works doesn't just spill facts. It waits for alignment. It waits for the moment when the evidence, the witnesses, and the audience are all ready to receive it. That's when the chain breaks. It isn't about speaking louder, it's about speaking when silence can no longer compete. At that point, the lie doesn't just look weak, it looks absurd, and absurdity is a death sentence for deceit. For you, this means freedom never came just because truth existed. Freedom came when the truth was undeniable, when the timing cut through the fog of distraction and landed like a blade. That moment is almost surgical. One cut in the right place, and the entire structure of the lie collapses on itself. The danger of mistimed truth is that it can feel like shouting into an empty room. You may be right, but if no one is ready to listen, the chain still holds. The brilliance of perfect timing is that it doesn't just reveal, it convicts. It places the guilty in a position where denial looks like madness and silence looks like guilt. And once that timing lands, no cover-up can survive it. The truth doesn't just show up, it shows up when the lie is at its weakest. And that is what sets you free. Number 12, their motive for speaking is never noble. That's where many people get tricked, thinking a sudden confession is some kind of moral victory, a sign that guilt finally turned into integrity. But confessions rarely come wrapped in purity, they come wrapped in fear. The person who once guarded the lie with their life doesn't suddenly grow a backbone of righteousness. They calculate. They measure the cost of silence against the cost of exposure, and choose whichever one leaves them with the least damage. It isn't love for truth that makes them speak, it's survival. This is why their words must always be weighed carefully. When someone who lied for years suddenly decides to tell it all, it's not because their conscience finally overpowered them. It's because their position became unsafe. Maybe new evidence is surfacing. Maybe someone else is threatening to reveal it first. Maybe the weight of suspicion is circling closer and they're scrambling to control the narrative before it crushes them. Whatever the trigger, the motive is the same. Self-preservation. They want to soften the blow, redirect the heat, or craft a version of confession that keeps them from burning entirely. And yet, people often misinterpret these confessions as bravery. They applaud the act of finally coming forward, forgetting the years of silence that protected the lie in the first place. But a late truth doesn't erase early betrayal. Their courage is just damage control. Their repentance is nothing more than bargaining with consequence. It's the equivalent of tossing a bucket of water on a fire they themselves started, then expecting praise for trying to put it out. The most dangerous mistake is assuming their exposure was for your benefit. It wasn't. You were collateral, useful, but not central. They spoke because their own seat was on fire, not because they suddenly cared about the ashes you were left in. If the cost-benefit analysis had landed differently, they would have kept quiet forever. So when the confession arrives, accept the truth, but don't be fooled by the performance. Don't confuse panic for principle. Don't confuse survival instinct for conscience. Their words may dismantle the lie, but the motive behind them is anything but noble. It's a transaction with fate, a last-minute plea to save themselves before the weight of their own silence buries them alive. Number 13. The exposure is only half the story. It's easy to get caught up in the drama of the truth finally surfacing, but the real weight of revelation lies in what it exposes about everyone else who knew. When the lie collapses, it doesn't just reveal facts, it pulls back the curtain on silence. And silence, in this context, is never neutral. It's an active choice, a deliberate withholding that allowed the falsehood to grow legs and run unchecked. This is why exposure is so dangerous for entire circles, not just the liar who started it. Once the truth is spoken, people naturally begin asking who else knew, who else heard, who else nodded along but said nothing. That chain of questions doesn't just stop with the guilty party, it extends to every bystander who decided self-preservation mattered more than justice. Suddenly, silence looks like complicity. Those who thought they could hide behind "not my business" or "I didn't want to get involved" find themselves dragged into the spotlight as accessories. The irony is brutal. The original lie may have been small enough to pin on one person, but the silence that kept it alive implicates many. Silence reveals loyalties, fears, and transactions. It shows who valued comfort over courage, position over principle. And when the truth finally resurfaces, the betrayal stings not just because of the lie itself, but because of the chorus of people who could have spoken earlier and chose not to. That collective silence indicts more loudly than the original fabrication. This is why exposure rarely feels like closure. It doesn't just fix the narrative and set the record straight, it forces a reckoning. People realize the betrayal wasn't isolated, it was systemic. Friends, colleagues, or family members knew pieces of the truth, but let you carry the weight alone. And that knowledge creates a wound deeper than the lie itself. The half story most people don't tell is that exposure is a spotlight with a wide beam. It doesn't just illuminate what was hidden, it casts shadows on everyone who stayed quiet in the background. And in those shadows, silence becomes louder than words. The lie may have created the storm, but it's the silence that proves who was willing to let you drown. Number 14. Vindication isn't the reward, discernment is. Too often people imagine that when the truth finally comes out, the world will throw a parade in your honor, that applause will rain down and every door once closed will fling wide open. But that's not how it works. Vindication is rarely glamorous. It doesn't erase the damage, it doesn't refill the years, and it doesn't heal the trust that was shattered while the lie lived unchecked. What it does give you, however, is something far more valuable: clarity. When you walk through betrayal, silence, and exposure, you don't come out craving applause. You come out with sharpened sight. You start to see people differently, not through the lens of their words, but through the evidence of their choices. You now know who kept their mouth shut when speaking up would have mattered. You know who sold loyalty for convenience. You know who bent under pressure and who stayed unshaken. That's discernment, and it's a prize more enduring than public validation. Discernment means you no longer confuse proximity with loyalty. You stop mistaking friendliness for integrity. You learn who can be bought with status, who can be bent with pressure, and who will break the moment standing with you cost them something real. That knowledge arms you in ways applause never could. Applause fades, but discernment recalibrates how you build, who you trust, and what you protect. The true transformation lies in how you now navigate the world. You don't waste energy defending yourself in every room because you've seen how quickly rooms can turn. You don't chase acceptance because you've witnessed how cheaply it can be sold. Instead, you carry a quiet strength that comes from knowing you survived without the crowd's approval. And now you walk with the confidence of someone who doesn't just see faces, you see motives. So no, vindication is not the shiny medal people imagine. It's subtler, deeper, and much more useful. It's X-ray vision into human nature, the ability to read the fractures behind polished smiles. That discernment becomes your shield, your filter, and your guide. In the end, applause is temporary, but the ability to see who is real and who is not, that's the permanent gift of having lived through the lie and come out the other side. In the end, the collapse of the lie is never just about truth finally stretching its wings. It's about exposure, silence, motives, and timing all converging at once. The liar is unmasked, but so are the quiet spectators who let falsehood live unchecked. The confessor reveals the story, but also reveals themselves, proving that motives are rarely noble and timing is everything. What you walk away with is not applause, not vindication, but the sharpened gift of discernment. The ability to see through people with an X-ray lens, to know who bends under pressure and who stands unshaken when it matters most. This isn't a tale of pity or praise. It's a blueprint of power. The kind forged not in noise, but in survival, in watching the lie age faster than truth, in holding steady until exposure became inevitable. And now the reward isn't that they finally admitted what you always knew. The reward is that you are no longer naive. You carry clarity as your inheritance, and with it you are untouchable in ways they never foresaw. The story began with their lie, but it ends with your vision. Clearer, sharper, and unshakable. That is the true victory. If this story opened your eyes and gave you the clarity you've been seeking, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button to stay connected, like if it resonated, and share with someone who needs to see the truth unfold. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your take on this exposure, the lies and the lessons hidden in the silence. Join the conversation and be part of a community that sees through deception and values real discernment. Stay blessed always. Blessed.